today we'll be having a talk with Professor Pankaj Jain as well. First, let us start with an invocation. I request Jāti to do the invocation.
And we stand up for a small prayer, the meaning of which is, let our aim be one and single, let our hearts be joined as one, united be our thoughts, at peace with all, may we be together in harmony. Om Samgachatvam Samvadatvam Samvo Manamsi Janatam Deva Bhagayatha Purve Sanjanana Upasate Samano Manja Samiti Samani Samanam Manah Sahachittamesham Samanam Mantram Ahimantrayevaha Samanena Vohavishajuhomi Samaniva Akutihi Samana Hridayanivaha Samanamastu Vomanoho Yathavat Susahasati Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you, Arjun, for the invitation. Now I invite Pramod ji to come and give a quick introduction about the Indic book.
Namaste and thank you for joining. Indic Book Club is a city-based network of speakers, events and material that is being approved because of new generation and new India that we are seeing. It was started by Harikiran Vadlamani in Singapore. It has now 8 chapters in India, 8 chapters in the United States, 1 in the offing in New Zealand. The concept is to invite speakers who have written books and have done research in a particular area, and to have them speak and discuss a topic, and see if there is a churning of the minds and thoughts. So I welcome Dr. Jain. Thank you, Vivek Jain Anandji, for facilitating this, and I hope you all will have a very good, stimulating time today. Thank you.
It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Pankaj Jain, who will be our speaker today. He is currently a professor at the University of North Texas, 1010. He got his PhD from University of Iowa in 2008 and his master's from Columbia University in 2003. He has been working on a vast variety of subjects, including environmental issues in India and movements with it, Hinduism, Jainism, and religions and their portrayal in films, and language, different languages, Hindu languages, Hindi, Urdu, Sanskrit, and their literature and stuff. His monograph, Dharma and Ecology of Hindu Communities, Sustenance and Sustainability, which he wrote in 2011, got him a couple of awards, book awards, and he was very famous then. Now he has written another book, Science and Socio-Religious Revolution in India, Moving the Mountains. This book hopefully is going to bring another set of awards and big recognition for him in the whole Hindu community. He has published a lot of articles in several religious journals, and he has also contributed to Huffington Post, Washington Post, and the Times of India and Patriots. His teaching interests include religion and ecology, and he's interested in connecting ancient practices with modern day contemporary issues. So he has used a lot of science from past wisdom to help energy efficiencies in churches and temples. He has also taught at universities like North Carolina State University, New Jersey University, Rutgers, before joining UNT. He is an affiliate with the Harvard University's Pluralism Project. He is also the India representative for the International Society for Environmental Ethics. And he has also worked as a consultant at Sustainable Community Initiatives. He has presented at multiple forums, academic forums, high schools, colleges, and also like temples, churches, and other community centers. In his past life, he also was a computer science major, and he was a software engineer as well. So he has done all facets of life. So I welcome him warmly here, and I ask him to share his vast experience and knowledge with us.
Thank you very much, Vivekji, for the introduction. This is my first time here on UT Austin, Texas. I'm in Dallas area, not too far from here, so it took me, I guess, 7 years to be able to cross the boundary and come from Dallas to Austin. So very happy to be here. My major research focus has been environmental ethics and so on. But today I'm venturing into one of the most debated topic, caste system, so-called caste system. And I'll share what I found all these years trying to research what I have done all these 7 years. So as we begin into this intense topic, there are several key terms that we will be encountering. We have heard these terms many times. Varna, and then there is Jati, and then of course caste. And then also today is Ambedkar Jayanti. Today is the birthday of Baba Sahib Bhimrao Ambedkar, and so we definitely honor him and remember him as one of the giants of Indian leadership during the colonial times, and even after that, when he created the largest and some kind of a new Smriti, the Constitution of India, that we now follow in India, with the letter and the spirit. So let's begin the topic. And so, before we get into the Indian situation, let's take a look at what a scholar from France, a French scholar, Georges Dumézil, he came up with this hypothesis called tri-functional hypothesis, in which he sees, so as we know the Varna system has four Varnas in Indian history, but what he found and what he hypothesized is that there is a tri-functional or tripartite social categorization in all the different world cultures, Indo-European world cultures, in Germanic people, Celts and Scandinavians, Greeks, Germans, Romans, Hittites and Persians, and Indo-Aryans. All over the world, he sees from Asia to Europe, he sees that there are these three divisions of society. There are what we call as the priests, so-called the wisdom specialists. There are warriors or the war specialists, and there are food producers or wealth specialists. And those specialists he sees in the gods and goddesses of all these communities. So there are gods in Greek culture, as we know, Zeus and Jupiter and Mitra and Varna, that are in Varna in Indian society, in Vedas. Those can be called as the gods or goddesses of wisdom. Then there are gods and goddesses of war, in what we can call as power deities, Mars and Indra in our own Indian Vedic culture. Similarly, food producers, bounties deities in all the Greek cultures, Roman cultures, and Indian culture. So what I'm trying to get to as I get into deeper into Varna system is that it may look like a very quite unique to Indian society, but what he found actually is that it is common across Indo-European culture, not just in India, all the way from. So this is that he's talking about proto-Indo-European people. So long before, so that's another theory that scholars have, that long before we talk about Indian or Aryan people in India, there were people called Indo-European people, and then this particular scholar is going even before Indo-European people. That's what he calls as proto-Indo-European societies. that's very, so we talk about prehistoric communities. They all had these three groups of people and groups of deities: wisdom, wealth, and war. Wisdom, wealth, and war. W3 Ws. That works very well. So that kind of this broad classification of different specialists is not unique to Indian society. It's a global. It was global in nature, and it's global in nature even today, as I think you can see. Right, now let's get into what original system or the first text that we have in Hindu culture, Hindu text that we have. So oldest, probably written record of oldest text is the Rig Veda. And in the Rig Veda there is Purush Sukta, which is the 1090. There we have the first ever mention of not the word Varna, but the system of Varna, where a cosmic person, cosmic Purusha, is being sacrificed, and from his different parts is the whole universe coming into being. So his eyes become sun and moon, his mind becomes the sky, his breath becomes the wind, right? And his head becomes Brahmin, his upper body becomes the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, and his feet becomes the Shudra. The first ever mention of, without using the word Varna itself, but the word used are Brahmins, and for Kshatriyas the word used is Rajanya, and then Vaishyas and Shudra. So that's one earliest mention in Purush Sukta. Right? So that we know the spiritual creatures and scholars, Kshatriyas tend to be those who are involved in internal order, external defense, and traders and entrepreneurs and service folks are the Shudras. Alright, so what Vedas mention, Vedas and Upanishads, what they mention is the spirit of the Varna system. What was the spirit of the Varna system? What was the intention of the Varna system? Varna system itself, Varna was based on the nature, the aptitude, and action that you follow in your life based on your own nature and aptitude. So this is a division of labor that talks about duties and characteristics and qualities of human being, or what kind of work they are doing. Not about rights, but it's more about duties and one's action that they follow in their life. Because of this division, at least a loose division of duties, we find in the long, more than several millennia of Indian history, we find that there is always, we find that Brahmins have speciality or specialization in spiritual and intellectual matters, but we rarely or never see Brahmins becoming the kings also. Brahmins becoming emperors, we don't see that. And the reverse is also true. We don't see the kings or emperors doing the Brahmins' roles. We have some anything we see, or there are always exceptions. Right? Anything we say, especially a complex history as we know in India, there are always exceptions. But broadly, we can say there are exceptions like Janak. Janak was a Kshatriya, but by his aptitude, by his interests, by his study, by his development, he also is having dialogue with Yagyavallkya and Ashtavarkra, and then he is now also accepted. I'll get into more details about these examples, but broadly speaking, we know that mostly emperors or Kshatriyas were in government affairs, right, or management of the society, or management of the empires. Similarly, Brahmins were doing the management of the knowledge and wisdom, not management of empires. So society remained, could never become a theocratic society or autocratic society. It was always because of this division of labor or division of duties, we find that the centralization of power that happened in, for example, medieval Europe, because of the Pope becoming controlling both the theological affairs and also political affairs. That kind of situation we don't see in Indian society. So that's one, I guess, spirit or intention of the Varna system as described in ancient texts. And there are three sample texts that I would like to share. So in Vrihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find in Mahabharata also, we were all Brahmins or all Shudras. By birth, everybody is of the same Varna. By one's development, by one's interest and aptitude, one can change one's Varna based on what they want to do in their life. But by birth, everybody is of the same Varna. In Bhagavad Gītā, as we know, we have heard this shloka many times, the Guna Karma Vibhag, the three Vibhags of three Varnas that Krishna says that Krishna not as a historical Krishna person, but he's talking about the spiritual or cosmic consciousness, the Brahman. And in that spirit he says that the fourfold Varna Chaturvarnya Vyavastha was created by him based on the gunas and qualities. He is not saying that, but based on the birth itself, your Varna is sort of hardwired in stone. He's not in stone. He's not saying that. He's saying that by guna and qualities is the Varna created. Manusmriti says, just as a wooden toy elephant cannot be a real elephant, and a stuffed deer cannot be a real deer, so without studying text and the Vedas and the development of intellect, a Brahmin by birth cannot be considered a Brahmin. So birth is never it's not a ticket to become a Brahmin or Kshatriya or Vaishya. It's by your study, by your development, by your interest, your aptitude, you become what you have become, what the Varna that you have become. Okay, now we have more examples. At least I don't have the historical or archaeological evidences of these people, but from the text that we have library of libraries in the whole Indian history. So just looking at the Sanskrit library of Sanskrit text, if we find all these names and we see that their lineage is not, at least not from the Brahmin or Kshatriya, very not fixed in that sense. It seems to be very diverse and different. So let's look at Vasishtha, for example. So we find that Vasishtha's mother is a courtesan, dancer, but he is celebrated as one of the well-respected Brahmin rishi that we have in our tradition. Vishwamitra seems to transcend again the Varna of Kshatriya and trying to becoming Brahmin, and then there is a rivalry between Vishwamitra and Vasishtha, as probably some of you know. And so that's Vishwamitra. And then Vyasa is a celebrated author or compiler of Vedas and Mahabharata and Puranas, and he is the son of a Shudra woman and Brahmin father. So again, that mixed heritage, mixed lineage. Parashar is the son of a Chandal woman and Brahmin father. Valmiki, the author of Ramayana, the Adi Kavi, is also from, becomes, as some of you know, he was a robber, right? He's not again from, we don't know for sure at least, we don't know that if he was born in a Brahmin family, because he used to loot people and steal things and so on, but by his development again, spiritual development, his devotion, he's now celebrated as the Adi Kavi, the original sage poet, original sage. Janaka, as we already mentioned, because of his wisdom and his interest in spiritual matters, we see him talking to Yagyavalkya and Ashtavakra and so on. So Janaka is another example of Kshatriya as a Brahmin. Vidura in Mahabharata is also born of a Shudra woman, and now because of his wisdom and so on, he is celebrated as a Brahmin. Kauravas and Pandavas, the Kshatriyas, right, they're ready to kill as many people as they can, but they are also descendants of Shudra woman and a Brahmin man. So Brahmin and Shudra, they are now emerging to become Kshatriya. So we see this movement and flexibility across the Varnas all throughout the several textual examples of several heroes and several sages and warriors that we have in long history of Sanskrit texts. Now these are the historical people. So scholars have found archaeological and other evidences that these are the people that we know that they actually existed in history for sure. So Chandragupta Maurya, for example, we know that he was a shepherd, and by his training from Chanakya and by his martial vigor and so on, he becomes one of the first early emperors of ancient Indian history, so a Kshatriya. Ashoka, a similar example, Ashoka, the grandson of Chandragupta Maurya. And then Shivaji, also all these great emperors and fighters and warriors and kings, they show us historical evidences where they were not born in Kshatriya or Brahmin family, but they, by their development, by their qualities, they have transcended again from Shudra to Kshatriya. Then all these great authors and poets and saints and sages, Kalidas, Tiruvalluvar, Kabir, Surdas, Ramdas and Tukaram, none of these were born in any Brahmin family, but by their gigantic, legendary literary contributions, by their devotion, by their spiritual tendencies, I think everybody would agree that we have no problem accepting all of them into Brahmin Varna, because of their qualities and characteristics and literary output and so on. And then in modern history, we have these great figures of Gandhi and Vivekananda, Aurobindo, Mahesh Yogi and Chinmayananda. None of them were born in Brahmin Kula or Brahmin Varna, but again by their spiritual leadership, by their intellectual leadership, by what they have done throughout their life, it would be not wrong if one were to consider them as being into a Brahmin or Gandhi's case, maybe a more complicated way to put it. But I think Vivekananda, Aurobindo, Mahesh Yogi, Chinmayan, I think we would not be opposed to putting them, considering them as also great Brahmins. But they were not born in Varna. All right, more getting even deeper now into something. So far I shared some examples from the Sanskrit texts and some from historical examples. Now getting into from Varna to Jati, which gets even more controversial, I think. But we will try step by step. So Varna was, let me go back actually. So Varna was, some people have translated Varna as color, but Varna also means simply classification of people. So Varna has, at least in my opinion, has nothing to do with color of the skin of the people, but Varna is the categorization or classification of the broad four classification of the Indian society as based on their characteristics and by their tendencies, by their aptitude, and that's how we decided or considered or accepted people in different Varna. So far we discussed that. So now into Varna to Jati and Caste. Now, what we find so far, at least in my research, I think mostly in most of the Sanskrit texts at least, the word that we find is Varna. Caste is of course not even an Indian term. Caste came from, as you know, probably some of you know, from Portuguese language and Spanish. We'll get into that. We also don't really find the word Jati, not at least with that prominence as Varna word. The Jati and Caste are a pretty modern word in my opinion. I think we'll see how they came into our vocabulary. So Varna was what was mentioned in the Sanskrit text that we find in all the history. But what we find today is the word unanimously used and present everywhere is Jati and Caste. Right? So Jati as a word simply means kind, or there's another word Prajati in Sanskrit, which means also which can also be used as species of birds, species of flowers. Prajati word. So Jati simply means kind of people. So what kind of birds or flowers? So Jati is really a broad term, not just within humans, but can be applied to flowers, birds, and flora and fauna, wildlife, and so on. Jati simply means kind. But how it has been used in the human sphere, that we know is used as the endogamous community, which means that like many indigenous communities across Australia and Native America and Siberia, Africa, there are several tribes that would marry only within their own tribe. Right? So a tribe will not marry a boy or girl outside that tribe. Is that already known, right? That by tribe, what I mean is the indigenous communities. Indigenous communities, Native American communities, for example, or Australian Aborigines, or African communities. So those are the indigenous communities have this kind of rules that they follow, where they marry only endogenously, only within the tribe. So that is one, and then there are several scholarly theories and books where people have shown that the prehistoric tribes in Indian society eventually evolved into becoming Jati groups. So because almost all indigenous prehistoric communities already had those marriage rules continue to be applied to the Jati groups as well. So what happens today, if you look at the matrimonial advertisement, everybody knows that we are always looking for Jati-based marriage alliances, matrimonial alliances. And that suddenly seems so, non-progressive to many people. But if you go back to prehistoric times, it's nothing new, nothing different from what was going on for thousands of years, what is still going on for thousands of years in almost all indigenous communities, Aborigines, as I said, and Native Americans. So that's the same system that they just evolved from the tribal rules of marriage to now Jati-based rules for marriage. All right, I hope I could make that clear. So, all right, so that's one aspect of the Jati system, and we'll get into this in one or two more lines in the next slide. But let's keep going, and now we are as the European people or conquerors and rulers, and how colonial times started in 14th century, 15th century, 16th, 17th, and 18th and 19th century. is when the scholars from European world started coming into South Asia, India, and they started studying our society from their lenses. Now the lenses that they used were already based on what was going on in Europe that time. So in Europe what was happening in 15th century is that if you remember, if you recall, there was the Reformation happening within Christianity. So the Protestant as a group, as a new sect was being formed within Christianity, and that was already criticizing the Catholic community, Catholic ways of Christianity, and also criticizing the Jewish ways of communities. So as they found the problems in those communities, and as these Protestant scholars, as they came into India, they were applying those same lenses on the Indian reality also. So they already were sort of expecting to see some people like who will be priests and who will have the highest ritual purity, and there will be some people who will be not so ritually pure. So they were kind of expecting that same hierarchy that they found in Jewish communities and other communities in Europe. The same lenses were being applied. I'm just telling you what they were coming from. So those were the ground reality in Europe that time. The same realities they are expecting in India. So now as they apply those lenses on India, one of the major first, groundbreaking scholar, as he is called, Louis Dumont, a French scholar also. We have already second French scholar here, but we already saw the Dumézil theory of tripartite division. And now Dumont sees the hardcore hierarchies in India, and the word he uses, I didn't put it, is homo hierarchius. He says that human beings are inherently hierarchical, especially in India. So there are always some people are at the top, some people are at the bottom. So he sees this hierarchy inbuilt into Indian situation. Okay, that's one major theory, and then he influenced all the major later scholars in Europe and in America, even contemporary America and now India also. Most of the sociologists, most of the humanities and social science scholars are still, indirectly or unconsciously or subconsciously, they are still based on what Dumont came up with his theory of seeing hierarchy in Indian society. So now this hierarchy, maybe this was these are all just speculation and theories by the Western scholars, and what they see is that maybe this hierarchy was designed so that the labor can have this division of labor, the economic division, or it was used for bartering. So when there is no currency to exchange, let's say in rural India, rural communities, so farmers will give his or her product to the Kshatriyas without charging anything, and the Kshatriya will in turn provide service. Maybe that was the motivation. So they are trying to study the system from these lenses. And of course, as I mentioned, religious as ritual purity, that was one major lens that they were trying to apply, because as they were critiquing the non-Protestant society in Europe, there was this intense debate, intense fight even, between the Catholics and the Protestants, and people were being burned alive in Spain and other places. So there's already this intense criticism and conflict going on in Europe. The same lenses are being globalized. So this hierarchy of ritual purity and so on is being imagined and being applied in India also. That's one major model. Second model is by Mackie Marriott, and he is still still active from University of Chicago. I think he's 90 plus, very, very senior scholar. And what he found, he had a major disagreement with the theory by Louis Dumont, and Marriott says that we should really study India from Indian categories. We should not apply Western categories. What he found, what he sees in Indian society is the three dosha division: the sattva, the rajas, and the tamas. Sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic division that we find in many of our texts, all the way going to the Samkhya text, and then the Bhagavad Gītā also mentioned that, Ayurveda mentions that same division that he sees in the three major Varnas of the Indian society. So he says that probably Brahmins are more in tune towards sattva, Kshatriyas are more in tune towards rajas, and Shudras and Vaishyas are more in tune towards the tamas. So inherently Brahmins are more peaceful and more spiritually aware, and Kshatriyas are more for martial and Rajasic kind of qualities and more towards physical valor and so on. And Shudras are towards the service, and then where more lethargy is needed, not so much charge or more, not so much leadership is needed. That's where Shudras are. So he sees that the three gunas are being mapped into the three varnas. That's what Machiavelli does. And then another key interesting word that he finds, he says that Machiavelli is saying this, is that unlike what we find in the Western history, is where the idea of individuality is very, very strong. Right? Individual freedom is of utmost important, but not so in the Indian society. Indian society, what the term that he coins is that the Indians are not individuals, they are individuals. What it means is that the sense of identity that an Indian has is very fluid and flexible, it's very open. See, so he or she is divided horizontally and divided vertically. So our ideas, our thoughts, feelings seems to be always being interchanged across our varnas or jatis, but also across varnas. Right? So in our same varna also, but also with different varnas. So that was another way of looking at the varnas that merit comes with. So instead of looking at the individual as an island, that as how Western theory will imagine a person as with his or her independence. Different from that, in Indian sense, it's more about individuality. So a person is always divided horizontally and vertically. So that's how the Varna or Jati theory applies. That they are not limited into one person, but they are always have this group sense, group identity for one's Jati or one's Varna. Okay, and then with the next model, aspectual model, tries to combine the theory by Dumont and Marriott, and that's how, as I was saying, that most of the anthropologists are still based on the two major theories that were given by the senior scholars, and most of the ethnographic research that happens, it combines spirituality, centrality, and hierarchy of basically the theories of Marriott and Dumont. Okay, and so we're still looking at the Western scholarship. So Western scholarship also, as I said, as we already noted, right, that it was in parallel with the colonial theories, colonial effect. So what happened in colonial times, one of the major changes that came to Indian society is what happened is by this Lord Risley. Risley, as I said, as I already mentioned a couple of times now, that they were all really inspired, motivated by what was going on in Europe. In Europe, there was this new science came called race science. So they saw that the human figures and human races have different physical attributes, different even intellectual attributes, and race became extremely important phenomenon for human societies. And Lord Risley, especially in 1901, when he did the first census of all the Indian people, right, counting of population census, he mapped the racial categories into caste categories. So one-to-one, direct one-to-one. So by default, he imagined that just as Europe had these different races and so on, different castes of India, even different varnas, or even different people from different regions must have different races. It cannot be all one race, it must be different races. So that was the origin of the idea, which now many people would take it for granted, the Aryans and Dravidians. Right? So North Indians are all Aryans. Pamonji was joking with me that these North Indians are all Aryans and South Indians are all Dravidians. We just it has just entered our vocabulary subconsciously that Aryans are separate and Dravidians are separate. But Lord Risley has to be credited for the way he changed our thinking forever, apparently. So first time he divided all the people of India into two broad categories of Aryans versus Dravidians. Okay, so that was Risley, exponent of race science. He used the ratio of, it's very interesting. He used the ratio of the width of a nose to its height to divide Indians into Aryans and Dravidian races, as well as 7 major castes. So that was the origin of the idea of Aryans versus Dravidians that has now destroyed, I think. It has really destroyed, I think, at least Sri Lanka, as we know, that the ethnocide that happened even by the military because the Tamilians or Tamils or Tamilians were treated as Dravidians, Sinhalese apparently as the original Aryans, and then and so on, and you know what happened in Sri Lanka. So that one idea can lead to such a catastrophe in a country, Sri Lanka, and then so many subtle catastrophes even within India, even today. I think that this whole, there are political parties with Dravidian word, as you know, DMK, AIDMK, and so on. So that those ideas are still very extremely powerful, extremely influential. But Lord Risley was the first person who used those categories, and that sort of that he basically led to this frozen set of rank groups. As the census was counted, as the people were counted, they were given these fixed last names. But in reality, our identity, as Mackay Merritt would say, our identity is so fluid and flexible because sometimes we would identify ourselves with our village, or our state, our language, our gotra, our kula, our jati, our varna, right? So many different ways of identifying who I am, right? So, but all of those things got completely frozen into one fixed last name or surname that was given when the census was counted for the first time in 1901 by Lord Risley. So that's how the major impact happened because of the census. And this was the research that was done for the first time in a major way by Nicholas Dirks of Colonial University, now at UC Berkeley. And Nicholas Dirks was and others have said this also. So that was one major impact of the colonial ways of classifying the Indian society. So now today, after independence, as we know, caste has become now a political identity. Caste has been taken as a by default word, as if we were always had the caste system, so-called. Even though at closer scrutiny, we don't really find a caste system as such, because, as I said, we have Varna and Jati and Gotra and Kula and in so many other ways to identify. All of that was totally transformed and got fixed into caste system as such. And today, because of the vote bank politics and whatnot, and as I already mentioned, the political parties with those categories, it has become almost a political identity. And now that word untouchable has now been incorporated into Dalit word, and then that has led to another major political campaign by those groups. Mandal Commission, as we know, has also sort of added more energy into the debate, and more reservations based on the caste group, Jati groups is one of the major demands, and more Jatis, even so-called upper caste, and more upper caste people are also now demanding that we should be counted as the backward caste because we also get the advantage of the reservations. So it has become more of a political movement for economic rights and educational rights and so on. It has led into that. And then now I briefly want to mention the Modi era, where again we see for the first time that despite all these divisions and movements and campaigns based on castes and so on, apparently again the people of voters of India are seem to be transcending their caste-based identity and going for something that will be different from usual bickering of the politics. All right, no more on that. Let's keep going on that. Ahead on the birth date that we have today of Ambedkar, Baba Sahib Bhimrao Ambedkar. His birth date is today, April 24th, April 14th. And what was his contribution to this whole debate? First of all, we have to understand that Ambedkar himself had suffered a lot of discrimination already as he was growing up in Maharashtra. And from that kind of problem that he saw firsthand and experienced, from that he rises up and goes to United States. He comes to Colonial University. He does his PhD in anthropology with Dewey. John Dewey is his teacher. Then he goes to United Kingdom and studies the law. And then comes back to India, joins the freedom movement with Gandhi and has differences with Gandhi. And then his major campaign is to make the so-called lower caste people united and campaign for them. And he did campaign for them in a major way. In his later part of his life, he converts to Buddhism because he's really disappointed and frustrated with Hinduism, and he sees that Buddhism is that religion of values, where the values that he finds in the Western studies that he does in Colombia and in the United Kingdom, and he's looking for fraternity liberty and equality. His major campaign is for equality. And he says that Hinduism has no hope from his perspective. But he also is very careful in not accepting Christianity or Islam. So when he's criticizing religions, he says that Buddhism is more rational, more appealing than Christianity, Islam, or Hinduism. All three are out of question for him. And he wants to go for, and also he's extremely careful not to adopt Marxism, because in Marxism and communism, he sees all kinds of violence. So he's apparently, I think indirectly at least, influenced by Gandhi's non-violence. So he accepts liberation theology based on Buddhism, which he equates with Buddhism, but he rejects Marxism, he also rejects Christianity, Islam, and he rejects Hinduism. So none of that, but Buddhism he prefers, because he thinks that, he argues that, and he finds that even within Buddhism, there are two divisions between the Theravada and Mahayana. These are the two major sects within Buddhism. Theravada is practiced in the southern Asian countries like Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Thailand. Right? And Mahayana is practiced in China, Japan, Tibet, and Korea, and so on. So Northern Asia is all Mahayana, Southern Asia is all Theravada. So Ambedkar himself says he prefers Mahayana, because in Mahayana there is the ideal of Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva has postponed his own enlightenment so that he can help others achieve the enlightenment. He's not selfish to attain his own enlightenment and be done with it, but he waits for every being in the universe to also attain the enlightenment, and then he will gain his nirvana. So he prefers that, and he sees that the Bodhisattva ideal can really help the downtrodden or the so-called lower caste people or the people who are being oppressed in India for a long time. So he sees the hope for those people in the Bodhisattva ideal. But he's not out for achieving nirvana for himself. So he says that nirvana should be compared with the scientific rationality. So we should apply the Buddhist ideas rationally in a scientific way to uplift the major sections of society, not just sit under a Bodhi tree and not just be selfishly worried about our own nirvana. And then karma theory, he equates with theory of causation, cause and effect. What you sow, you will reap. So that kind of a cause and effect relationship he sees in karma theory. Prajna he translates as rational wisdom, not just intuitional or spiritual wisdom, but very grounded in the rational wisdom. And then karuna as a social justice. So karuna and prajna and karma, nirvana, these are the authentic Buddhist terms, but he has sort of translated those Buddhist spiritual words or philosophical words into social justice movement. How those concepts can be identified, can be translated into social justice, or how those theories can help the people of his community. So karuna should be applied as social justice, where again people can be uplifted. He does criticize Manusmriti which has some references to the discrimination as he sees them, but he admires Upanishad all the same time. So he's not outrightly rejecting all the Indian spiritual wisdom. He just criticizes the discrimination aspects that are found in Sanskrit. He also is against Aryan invasion theory. He categorically rejects the Aryan Dravidian division that we just saw from Lord Risley. So he says that all Indians, North Indians or South Indians, are all from the one same race. They don't have different kinds of noses or no more different width or length of noses. All that he rejected completely. He also wanted to reject the Article 370 that is still given as a special status to Jammu and Kashmir. He was also for the Universal Civil Code. Okay, on the nose thing, I found this quote from Ambedkar directly. That measurements establish that the Brahmins and the untouchables belong to the same race. From this it follows that if the Brahmins are Aryans, the untouchables are also Aryans. If the Brahmins are Dravidians, the untouchables are also Dravidians. If the Brahmins are Nagas, the untouchables are also Nagas. Such being the facts, the theory of the nasal measurement must be said to be based on a false foundation. So he really attacks or rejects what Lord Risley was saying to divide Indians. But unfortunately, I think even after what Ambedkar said, I think many people in India and even here, I think we just take it for granted that Aryans were outsiders and Dravidians were native indigenous Indians. So all that is now has entered our consciousness, even though it's based on false theory. Okay, now some more details on caste system. Even everybody uses this term caste system as if it's a standardized system, as if somebody just sat down and came up with this system, which never really happened. But there are a lot of misconceptions. One major misconception, especially that the undergraduate students that I teach in my classes, those students I think have these kind of ideas that caste determines one's occupation, and that is not as a rule. It can, in some cases, it can happen that son of a, and we have seen so many examples, son of a politician becomes a politician or son of a doctor becomes a doctor. That it can help in that direction, but it's not a rule. Right? So that's the same thing applies for, let's say, son of a cobbler will become a cobbler, son of a blacksmith will become blacksmith. It can help in some cases, but it's not a rule. Caste designations are changes. That's another misconception that also we've seen in the history and in the text, that those designations can change all the time. Caste determines fixed hierarchies, but we have just seen that those hierarchies can be very fluid and very flexible throughout the history. People have changed their Varnas, their caste, and their Jatis all the time. Caste also is not the signifier of blood relationship. So this is just another misconception with, especially in American students. I think that as if all Patels are all brothers and sisters, or all Jains, so that's not the case also, right? Castes are unique to Hindus. That's also a misconception because the word itself came from Portuguese and Spanish languages, where again, as people were comparing and contrasting Protestants versus Catholics, that's how they were seeing, especially even in Latin America, in South America, they saw that there were these blood lineages, the hierarchies and lineages as determined by their blood relationship, by their birth. That's how caste entered the English language. The vocabulary was formed as they encountered people in South America and in other parts of Europe. Another misconception is that caste is legitimized by Hinduism, and that's also is not really true, because we know that reform movements going back to even Kabir and many other devotional poets, Tiruvalluvar, they have all criticized the discrimination that the caste sometimes leads to. So that's never accepted by Hindu leaders, Hindu reformers, or Hindu texts. And of course, the Indian Constitution in 1950, written by Ambedkar, has also abolished the discrimination and the untouchability aspects of it. Caste is not abolished by the Constitution, only the discrimination and untouchability is abolished. Just like in this country, race itself is not abolished, right? Race discrimination is abolished. You cannot really abolish religion or race or Jati. Jati has been now used as caste, but the discrimination aspect is abolished. Okay, some more on this. So we already basically touched upon this, that social inequality is a phenomenon in all societies and religions. The Hindus or Hinduism has no monopoly of it. All communities have, no community in the world can be ideally egalitarian. There's always some discriminations and so on, so that people have to keep working at it and to keep reforming it. All Jatis or castes, now I'm using it interchangeably, are really products of intermixing of different Varnas, and by that spirit, they should be treated as all equal, because no Jati was mentioned in the original Vedas or Upanishads, but what we find Jatis and castes now today are really intermixing going on for thousands of years. All the Varnas kept intermixing with each other, and that's what led to all the Jatis that we see. Marriage issue we already touched upon, so matrimonial alliances. We cannot compare the monolithic culture that we have in America. It's all mostly Protestant and Caucasian and English speaking and so on. But if you compare, let's say, Indian situation with the situation in Europe, there would be a preference, I think, that a German should marry a person who speaks the same language of German, rather than going for a marriage between German and, let's say, Swedish. Similarly, I think in Indian situation, where every state has a different language, different cuisine system, different dance system, different costume and so on, it's always a preference to have similar background to match, and that leads to matrimonial alliances. Other debate that we still have going on is one's achievements, or if one's life is it determined by nature or by nurture? We don't really have a settled answer to that. So how much of it is determined by the DNA, or how much it is determined by upbringing? That's where I think the debate of caste can also be compared with is by birth. Should it be determined by birth, or should it be totally left open and it should be left with the training? I think there can be some overlap with that. Some with the birth, and because of the family background, one can be sort of motivated to follow in the footsteps of one's parents, or one can also be totally open to the training that they receive, and they can choose their profession in that direction. Corruptions and distortions, yes, as we know that there are corruptions and distortions, and Hindu thinkers and reformers have been trying to reform for hundreds of years now. Kabir and Nanak, the whole Sikhism, Sikh community was formed again as a critique against caste system and other problems that Nanak saw in both in Hindus and Muslims, and he came up with the new idea of Sikh Dharma. Similarly, Kabir led to Kabir Panth. Right, Swaminarayan became another sect within Gujarat that was also about the egalitarianism as a critique of the caste Jati discrimination. In modern times, Swadhyaya movement has strived to lead another new movement as a social, religious, spiritual equality, which is part of my first book. And as we already noticed, Indian constitution has prohibited or abolished the discrimination. What are the benefits of this system? Two benefits at least I can mention, that when Jews came to India more than 2000 years back, because of the total liberty given to each Jati group, even in 2000 years back, Jews were accepted as yet another Jati that was accepted and into the pantheon of the Hindu Jatis. So Jews were called as the Saturday oil pressers or Shanivar Telis, because oil pressing was their traditional profession. So Jews had total liberty to practice their religion for 2 millennia without any interference from other Jatis, because each Jati had their own Jati Dharma. Christians, similarly, there are legends that Christians came also around 2000 years back in Kerala also. Jews also came to Kerala, and Christians also came to Kerala apparently. For Jews we know with more certainty. Christianity we don't know for certain if they really were as ancient as that. But Christians also were practicing their religion for all these centuries. First persecution that we find of Christians is done by fellow Christians. When Portuguese Christians and Catholic Christians, when they come, European Christians, when they come to India, they see these corrupt Christians in South India, and that's the first time the persecution happens at that time. So what we find is, again because of the Jati system, right, the Christians were most likely accepted as yet another Jati, and they had their full liberty without any persecution by Hindu. And as we know, Muslims have also been thriving in South Asia, India for centuries. Second largest country in the world is India with Muslim population. Zoroastrians came to Gujarat and they had full liberty to practice their Parsi Dharma or Zarathustra Dharma with full liberty 8th century onwards, and now today we know Tata as the biggest business empire in India. Similarly, Greeks and Bactrians and all these community, Huns and Kushans, they also were accepted as different Jatis within the Kshatriya Varna and in other communities of Buddhism and Sikhism. Okay. And this slide just mentions the fact that all the prehistoric civilizations across the world have disappeared, while India and China continue to survive, and not just survive but thrive in the global 21st century as two most ancient surviving civilizations. Maybe some credit we should give to these systems that have sustained the Indian society for thousands of years, the Jati and Varna system. And for further reading, these are the two books that I mentioned already, Nicholas Dirk's Caste of Mind, and the one book is still coming up, is still being published, and that talks about the same theories, that how caste system was really based on the foundations of what was going on in Europe and in the Western scholarship, and that's coming up I think in June in 2017. That is all I had to share, and questions I can take some questions and we can discuss.
So for questions, we'll pass on some additional extra.
Yeah, you can pass on few cards. You can write your questions on it, and you can questions and we can.
Chair up front.
fine.
Some for the FB Live.
But if you write it down, it could be other people can see what is happening now because it's going on live. It's going on live.
Yeah, so that will take. So question was, what, as a professor, what can be done to remove these misconceptions, or what is being done in the academic circles? Not much. There are still a lot of, as I said, the baggage, the colonial baggage, is still being transferred from one generation of scholars to the second generation, to the next generation of scholars. So for that to stop, I think more people have to really realize what was going on in colonial times. That's why it's important to really study what really exactly happened in that 19th century, 20th century, and how, in a major way, our own thinking, even Hindus have accepted these words as if they exist forever. So that more study and more research has to be done, both by the Western academic scholars, but also by the Indian academic scholars, and even by general public. And it will take some more time. For now, I see that sadly the colonial categories are being still prevalent across the world, even in India and here as well. So not much. So not a good answer. Sorry?
Can you share some thoughts on what could be done?
More study, more research, more such presentations, I guess. And the books that I mentioned in the last slide, these kind of books have to be written, have to be studied, and have to be shared more widely.
There's a question from Facebook Live from Anjali Kanojia. Could you comment on Varna, Jati and other religions that exist in India? And she will let you pick which religion you want to address.
Right. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think I made some reference to that the hierarchies and classifications and differences exist in all religions, not just in all Indian religions, but so Christianity has their own versions of Dalit Christians, right? Even Buddhism, even after they convert, they are called as the Dalit Buddhists, and so on. Even in Jainism and in Islam, all religions within India definitely already still have all kinds of caste differences. Because the idea is, I think the motivation there is that if they do not identify themselves, let's say if they convert from Hinduism to Christianity, and if they don't identify themselves as SC or ST, they will lose all the privileges that come with the reservation. So there's definitely that angle. But even outside India, all religions have some differences and some discriminations even. So, for example, the Muslims of Saudi Arabia, the Arabic Muslims are more pure than Muslims outside the Arabic lands. Right? So that kind of discrimination like this in Islam. In Christianity also, there are all kinds of, so there are blacks and white churches in this country, even in this country, right? So you will rarely see the mix of different races or different social classes, even within Christian churches, and so on and so forth. There are so many ways that people have all kinds of distinctions and discrimination in all the cultures. Right? What else?
I request everybody to pass the questions to Vivek ji. You can continue to write while the session is in progress as well.
So this is a question related to this. So it's almost same. What are the different castes outside India, instead of not different religions, but different India or outside Hinduism? What are they called? And we can use some.
I'm not the expert on all the religions of the world, but as I mentioned, right, that there are divisions and differences even within Islam, within Christianity, and let's talk about Jews. So as I mentioned, there were Jews in India for 2,000 years, right, for 2 millennia. But when those Indian Jews, when they went to Israel, first time they faced some discrimination was in Israel. So Israeli Jews thought that the Indian Jews are not pure enough and they had to do some things to become equal to the Jews in Israel. So those kind of discriminations exist even in Judaism, you can see now with this example, and Islam I already mentioned, in Christianity I already mentioned. So yeah, those kind of differences are always present.
So the next question is gods considered to have Varna in this script? Like, do gods also would classify the rest of Varna? And the reservation system has classified the Varna Jati becoming pretty bad.
Right, so as I mentioned in the first slide, Dumasel, the tripartite hypothesis, trifunctional hypothesis. So what he saw in the 18th century is this: the gods and goddesses in all Indo-European cultures have three groups, right? I mentioned wisdom, war, and wealth. So that existed in all the cultures of the world. That's what he saw even in the Vedic gods and Greek gods, Roman gods, and Russian, pre-Russian society, all across it. And then reservation has, as we mentioned, it has politicized the whole debate, and it's not going to go away as long as they see advantages. When they derive those advantages from being an SC or ST, they want to stick with that, and even the OBC reservations. So it has become a political issue.
So I think the question is, has reservation helped in alleviating this in any sense?
Everybody's an expert on the topic. All I can say is that it has really politicized and it has really hardwired the differences forever, as long as those differences are there. I think almost all political all our sort of, at least founding fathers, or let's say the constitutional writers at that time, even including I think Gandhi and Ambedkar and everybody, thought the reservation will be very limited, or probably for 10 years or 20 years we should keep the reservation system, but it has now become an internal system. So it's very hard to get rid of that hardcore categories. So it has politicized more than helped.
So the next question is, there has been social, racial, hierarchical differences in the US.
Yes.
Like black Australians versus white Americans.
Right.
Would you equally equate it to a caste system?
Yeah, so that's what has happened in the colonial time. That race discrimination was equated with caste discrimination. That's a problem. I think that or it has become more politicized. It has led to all kinds of even alliances. There are alliances between now evangelists, missionaries, and some African groups and some Dalit groups, and those alliances are more about achieving their own political gains rather than really helping the situation on the ground. It is becoming more about politics and increasing one's market share and so on, rather than reforming the society from ground up.
So the next question is, should you feel that we should continue with the caste system going forward? Because what impact will it have on our society?
The other synonym to that question is, are you willing to act God today? Recreate it.
Nobody can really. I think it's so difficult now to remove that category, because categories we have to accept that we all accept different kinds of labels. So, we are humans, we are males or females, we are of that Jati or this Jati, we are of that religion, of that this religion, we are of that nationality, right? So that's really not possible to remove all those labels. What is possible is to continue to foster harmony and plurality and diversity. That's already present in many spiritual traditions, including in Hinduism. So that's what has to be done and is being done by constitution, rather than trying to abolish the whole category itself. I think that's not possible. Yeah.
The next question is there any Hinduism, ancient Hinduism as a coursework for high schools in either Europe or USA?
Ancient Hinduism gets like one page in high school textbooks, right? In undergrad courses, in anthropology and religion department, we do have some undergrad courses and grad courses. In psychology, it's not mentioned. Linguistics, not mentioned. Classics, not mentioned at all. Literature departments have no mention of it. And so on. So mostly it is mentioned in anthropology, but anthropology still is heavily based on the colonial categories. Religion department does mention it, but mostly Christian categories, because the secular, what we call secular categories, are really based on the Christian theological category of religion and God and scripture and prophet and so on. So a lot of work has to be done, and more of young scholars and young students have to be inspired to choose careers based on humanities and social sciences. So we need thousands and thousands of people to really study, research, write more books, and try to change this.
So the next question is interesting. Would it be wrong to say that caste system in religious other than Hinduism is an effect of Hinduism on that religion and not indigenous to that religion itself?
No, as we mentioned in the first slide, maybe I can go back and show that slide again, because it's coming back again and again, this question. So that was the first slide that I started with. So there was no Hinduism influence, at least probably in that time frame, where already these three divisions people had in all kinds of societies: wisdom, war, and wealth. So it was indigenous to every community for going back to 3,000-4,000 years back. In what we discovered if we study from this perspective, so that you cannot blame Hinduism for any discrimination or division that existed for thousands of years in all kinds of cultures.
So the examples that you mentioned here, I noticed that there are polytheistic cultures. So Islam, polytheistic cultures, but so
right.
that is not the case for Islam and Christianity, right? So where do the caste divisions within them come from?
I'm not an expert on Islam and Christianity, but we know that the question has to be given to him. But we know that even right around the origin of Islam, the differences were already inbuilt into the system between the Arabic Muslims and non-Arabic Muslims. That much I know, but I'm not an expert on Muslim history.
Most of the examples which you have said are exceptions, and otherwise caste has been mostly patrilineal. Would you agree to this?
Yes, so that's a good one also. So as I was showing this slide, the endogamy and patrilineal, those are the anthropological words. So I like that word, so whoever use that word. The second point in this slide, the endogamous and patrilineal. Most of the tribal communities across the world are either matrilineal or patrilineal. What is the difference? Right? So father's last name or mother's lineage. Most of the communities are patrilineal, and also patrilocal. So after marriage, right, the bride or the girl's side, the girl will move to the husband's home. That's how the most indigenous communities across the world were and are. So that's what we see in Indian community as well. So it's just a continuation of traditions that existed for thousands of years in thousands of different communities across the world. So that's what we see here also. Nothing exceptional. So it's just a continuation of the traditional systems, and to say that maybe there is something inherently immoral about that is really, I think, not fair, because we are now sort of putting our judgmental lens on those traditions that existed across the world for thousands of years, and it worked well for those communities. It's working well, and they still are thriving and flourishing for thousands of years. So, and who knows if
the thing was also about hierarchy, because you mentioned about different people like Vasishtha, who moved across caste.
Right.
But the question was like, but caste is inherently hierarchical. Patrilineal was one of the parts,
Right.
but it's also hierarchical. Do you agree with that? What were the topics?
Right. So with that, we also saw.
Those examples are exceptions about them.
Right. So. So those are the examples where they had mixed lineage, and then we have these examples in history where both father's lineage and mother's lineage are transcended. Right. So, for example, Chandragupta is the son of shepherd father, right? And so on. Shivaji also. It's not just about mother's lineage in these cases, right? The whole lineage, both from father and mother, are being transcended by Indian examples. So there are many more examples, such examples we have, where we can say that it has happened across mother and father's lineages. Right? We can say that. All right. Yeah.
Okay, so last question. After 70 years of independence, why are Indian researchers not emerging to write papers and books to articulate the authentic Indian views and positions on this?
Yeah, because most Indians are becoming doctors, right, in computer science, computer engineers, and in India when I was growing up, right, you had only two choices: science, maths, science, biology, or maybe become a CA. But after coming here, then I changed my career, and then now I could do all these things. But so, as long as we are always for lucrative careers, we will continue to see colonial categories. So that's the problem. Yes.
Okay, so I think time's up. So I think time's up.
We'll continue after,
We still have like another half an hour where you can talk to him one-on-one and then get your questions answered and have a discussion with you. He has also brought some of his books, so if you want to have a look and if you want to buy some of his.
All right. Thank you very much.
There are more snacks left. Please.
There are some samosa and
samosas.